Racism against Native Americans. Discrimination against the races is the most pressing and international issue in our world today. People are letting the color of our skin determine who we are as people and what we are worth to others. Every day, people are physically, verbally, or sexually assaulted because of the color of their skin and their cultural background. However, this isn't a modern issue. For the Native Americans especially, this has been going on since the 1500s when new settlers came to America and forced Native Americans out of their land. It is optimistic to think that racism against others has gotten better since those times, but it has actually become more of an issue throughout our country. Racism against Native Americans has not changed at all since the 1500s and 1800s, but has almost gotten worse. In 1830, the United States government signed the Indian Removal Act, which forced Native Americans out of their homes and tribal lands so that newer American settlers would have somewhere to live. Even though President Andrew Jackson set up an agreement and established fair trades with the Native Americans, they actually received nothing in return for the land that they lost and were left with worse conditions than before. This forced the Native Americans to travel along the Trail of Tears, which was over 5,000 miles long and crossed about 8 states. On the trail, thousands of people died, and at what? For the cost of new white Americans to have the land for their own, and so the government could benefit from it? Throughout the 20th century, in film especially, Native Americans were always portrayed as savage and uncivilized Indians. Their characters in these movies were shown always wearing feathers or leather clothing, which is a very dated stereotype. Also, the communities and scenes that were set in these movies were shown as being cruel societies that were full of drunkards that were seeking vengeance from the war. Because there has been such a large controversy regarding these types of movies, there has been a call to action to change the way that Native Americans are portrayed. In movies like Little Big Man, The Missouri Breaks, or The Only Good Indian, the Native American characters are seen like the images on the left rather than the images on the right, which show actual Native American people today. You would think that we would have learned our lesson from that, but many more recent issues have broken out, like the Dakota Access Pipeline. This pipeline is an underground tunnel that is used to transport crude oil and stretches between the Dakotas, Illinois, and Iowa. However, if it were to be built, it would run right through the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota and would destroy their sacred tribal grounds. The American government is destroying tribal land and Native American property for their own profit, and they're not even offering any source of refugee for Native Americans whose homes are being destroyed. For anyone, it seems like the worst thing in the world would have their homes ripped away from them, but now they're having their identities made fun of also. Recently in the news, there's been a lot of controversy regarding Elizabeth Warren identifying herself as a Native American in order to help herself gain more following for her campaign, even though this is proven to be false. Warren has also been accused of giving over $800 million of government contracts reserved for minorities to several companies across the nation, claiming to be Creek Indian and Cherokee tribes. Not only is she undermining tribal sovereignty, but she is also misrepresenting and making fun of the Native American Indian culture. However, Elizabeth Warren isn't the only politician who is acting controversial against Native Americans. Recently, Trump has been consistently using hateful language and racial slurs towards Native Americans. He jokingly references Pocahontas and makes light of the genocide at Wounded Knee against the Lakota people, where hundreds of people were murdered. In addition to just plain out making fun of Native Americans, Trump has issued to remove several federal governments which give food and health assistance to Native American tribes in need. His administration has rolled back policies that protect the indigenous people and have failed to respect the honor of the tribe nations and their sovereignty. As if being unprotected by the government isn't enough, Native Americans also have the highest rate of unemployment. Even though Native Americans have the same skill set and potential as white Americans, they still have an extremely high unemployment rate, and those who are employed either work for tribal or U.S. government agencies. In the United States, unemployment exceeds 40% on some Native American reservations. On a worldwide scale, 2/3 of the 27 countries with a majority Native American populations have a higher unemployment rates than the national average. There is no reason for the employment rate to be this high, except for the fact that several authorities of the United States government hardly consider Native Americans to be citizens of the United States. With this being said, the research team at the Echo Hawk Consulting and First Nations Development Institutes conducted research on 28 focus groups in 11 different states, surveying over 13,000 people and analyzing 4.9 million social media posts to find out how Native American Indigenous people are portrayed in society. Shockingly, only 13% of the youth curriculum teaches current Native American events that occurred after 1900. Somehow, 40% of Americans surveyed didn't even know that Native Americans still exist, and over 40% were oblivious that Native Americans are ever discriminated against. As if that isn't bad enough, those who know Native Americans still exist stereotype them to be either alcoholics or extremely violent. Most Native Americans are presumed to be alcoholics because of an old stereotype, when in fact a recent study shown in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence showed that alcohol consumption by natives is shown to be generally less than that of Caucasians in the United States. Native American men are also frequently stereotyped as violent savages. The most popular images of Native Americans depict them at war with whites and other Native American tribes. Historically, the violent stereotypes were only used to justify the white population's effort to subdue Native Americans and show their masculinity. However, these stereotypes have still carried on to this day and makes it hard for Native Americans to live their everyday lives. Even if these stereotypes weren't still intact today, Native Americans would still be suffering because of the government's wrath. Unwillingly, Indian reservations are being used as dumping grounds for both nuclear and toxic waste without regards to the Native Americans who still reside there. Not only is this destroying their sacred tribal lands, but is also threatening the lives of everyone who lives there. Bailey Lopez of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation says that in the quest to dispose of nuclear waste, the government and private companies have disregarded and broken treaties, blurred the definition of Native American sovereignty, and directly engaged in a form of economic racism akin to bribery. Since the beginning of colonization in the 1500s, the government has always been prejudiced against Native Americans, and with people like Elizabeth Warren and Trump encouraging this racism, it is doubtful that it will end anytime soon, along with the suffering of the Native Americans.